To the time, the first two verses, and talked about the time of Daniel. Now we're going to look at the presentation itself of Daniel chapter 7. It has 3 parts to it. And notice also, very interestingly, there is an earthly part and a heavenly part. And then there is the interpretation. So we have in Daniel this earthly and heavenly contrast. In the book of Revelation, when we study that, you're going to see that there are 7 times that the book of Revelation goes between the heavenly and the earthly and back again. So Revelation is very heavy into the book of 7, the number 7. And here also we're going to see 7 parts in this prophecy. And those 7 parts, of course, are based upon the vision of Daniel chapter 2. So we believe that this was about 553, and about 15 years later is when we see the fall of Babylon. If you want to, we could look also at the idea, the great sea, as we read it in Daniel chapter 7. Let's see if we go here. We can make this thing work. Okay, we're going to the first slide. We have the 3 parts, the vision on earth, chapter 7, verses 1 through 8, the vision in heaven, chapter 7, verses 9 through 14, the vision interpreted, the 15 through 28. So, according to this presentation, to encourage believers to remember that God's plan for the future is firmly in place and His purpose will be accomplished. Like I said, this presentation is not mine, but we will make modifications to it as we go along. So the great wind, let's read verses 3 and 4 now. We've read verses 1 and 2, talking about the time of Babylon, its political and social life, we covered in our last talk. Let's read verses 3 and 4 now. Look at the vision itself. Who will do that for us? Okay, Damaris, please.
And 4 great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. The first was like a lion and had an eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it.
Okay, when Daniel said, come up out of the sea, he probably was thinking of the Mediterranean Sea. And there are other references to sea in Isaiah chapter 17, 12, and 13. Isaiah 57, verse 20, Jeremiah 6, 23. 46, 7 through 9, 47, verse 2, Revelation 13, 1. What do we see in Revelation 13, 1 in comparison to Revelation chapter 7, Daniel chapter 7? What do we read there? We need to go to the book of Revelation. Revelation 13, 1. What does it say? There's a beast that comes up where?
I stood up upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy.
Okay, so the image, we see the beast coming up out of the sea in Daniel. We see it also in Revelation 13, verse 1. Now, what does the sea represent? Where do we find that text? Revelation chapter 17, verse 15. We can also add there Revelation 17, 1. So then we also see something else. It says in verse here in Daniel that the winds strove upon the great sea. What do the winds represent? Let's turn to Jeremiah 25, verses 32 and 33. What do winds represent? That's the question. Now, if you look up wind or whirlwind, you'll find many references. Okay, this is the best text we found here for Jeremiah 25, 32, 33. What does it say there?
Thus saith the Lord of hosts, Behold, evil shall go forth from nation to nation, and a great whirlwind shall be raised up from the coasts of the earth. And the slain of the Lord shall be at that day from one end of the earth even unto the other end of the earth. They shall not be lamented, neither gathered nor buried. They shall be dung upon the ground.
So the whirlwind in this text is what we're interested in. The whirlwind represents strife among nations and also war. So this is a whirlwind. It has a symbol. This is one of the keys to understanding prophecy. And there are basically 7 keys to understanding the book of Daniel. Actually, there are about 90 to 100 different symbols that are fairly consistently used in Scripture. But here we need about 7 to understand Daniel and the Revelation. So the 4 winds are a common term in Scripture, and we see them here about 90 times in the Old Testament, about 30 times in the New Testament. This phrase is used, the winds of heaven, or similar, 4 winds of heaven. So a total 120 times throughout Scripture. So we've talked now about Nebuchadnezzar and different time periods of the rulership, and we've discovered that chapter 7 and the 4 beasts occur somewhere near the front part of Belshazzar's reign, or co-reign with Nabonidus. So this is our view here of putting this in perspective. And we can see that chapter 5 occurs with the fall of Babylon, chapter 6, after the fall of Babylon, a year or so later, and Daniel's ministry seems to end, as far as we know, about 536. And this is the chapters 10 through 12. So we can see the different time periods of when these things were written. And of course, according to our chart here, Daniel 8 occurs shortly after the vision of Daniel 7 according to modern chronological estimations. So from God's perspective, the empires of man are not pleasant and precious like we saw in Daniel chapter 2, but were represented by different forms of rebellion against God. No wonder he shows them to Daniel as wild beasts. Beasts being a symbol of kingdoms in rebellion against God. So the first beast was something like a regal lion. The second beast was, of course, something little different. It was like a bear, and so forth. We have different ideas about these things. Now, here we have some views of the millennium. Let's look at that for a moment. We have 3 different views of the millennium. Amillennialism is the belief that the present church age will continue until Christ's return, binding of Satan in Revelation 20 being fulfilled during the present church age. Historic premillennialism, belief that the church will go through the tribulation period of the 1,000-year reign. Dispensational premillennialism, belief that Israel and the church are 2 separate peoples of God, the rapture of the church before the Great Tribulation, and God fulfilling his promise to Israel through 1,000-year of earthly reign of Christ. We are premillennialists in that we believe that Christ will come and of course that the earth will be desolate for 1,000 years, and that's not even mentioned here in the slide. But now let's look at the coming of the kingdom. So there is this view that the believers will be raptured before Jesus comes. Is this a correct view of what we believe? There's a 7-year tribulation, and then there's a 1,000 years of millennium when Jesus rules the world. Is this correct? No, this is an incorrect view. This is what is being taught in most of the churches today. What is this? This is the belief that God's people are going to not have to go through the time of trouble. This is their bridge out of this world. All right? They're believing that we don't have this time of Jacob's trouble where we have to go through this time of trouble. But let's now go into the vision of Daniel chapter 7 and try to understand it in the context of the Advent movement. So the first beast was something like a lion. And we see that on the right, comparing it with Daniel. We have some different views that this kingdom is compared to Daniel chapter 2. It's very interesting that those who put together this presentation believe also of the amplification of Daniel 7 over Daniel chapter 2. And as we look very carefully at the different views, there may be truth to the idea that the image of its glittering metal portrays the world's kingdoms from humanity's viewpoint, impressive and great, whereas the beast depicts these earthly kingdoms from God's perspective, vicious and destructive. Now this is the New American Commentary. So there are people who are teaching Daniel chapter 2, Daniel chapter 7 in a very similar way, but with subtle differences. So the first beast of Babylon was a regal lion with wings of an eagle, and we know on the walls of Babylon we have this symbol. It wasn't actually a lion as such, but that was the closest idiom Daniel could find to describe what he saw. Although a lion with eagle's wings was the symbol of the Babylonian Empire, we shouldn't make the mistake of assuming God was using the commonly known human symbolism for this empire. In any case, it clearly represents the Babylonian Empire under Nebuchadnezzar. Note the interesting reference here that the heart of man was given it, apparently representing Nebuchadnezzar's conversion, as described in Daniel chapter 4. At that point, he was no longer a beast in spiritual sense, but a human being under the authority of God. Now, we already read about Babylon being destroyed, and in Isaiah 13, never to be inhabited again. But now we're going to go to the second beast and look at what it says there. What does it say in Daniel chapter 7, verse 5? Who will help us there? Adrian, you want to read it? You got it?
And behold, another beast, a second like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side. And it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh.
Okay, so there's different ideas about what the 3 ribs symbolize. Here we see that the second beast, like the bear, was raised up on one side. What do we have in Daniel chapter 2? We have the breast with 2 arms. And it says here that the dominant force was that the Persians who came up later were the dominant force over the Medes. The Medes were actually the ones who conquered Babylon. So the 3 ribs are believed to be Medo-Persia's victories over Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt. The prophet says like, which means that not exactly, is like a bear which raised up on one side. So its analogy he uses to describe this beast which he saw. In any case, he probably didn't see exactly a bear, but the closest thing he could describe to it was a bear. So the scholars are divided in the meaning of the 3 ribs. They represent the alliance perhaps of the Urartians and the Mennonites and the Scythians who tried to stop the Persians. Perhaps it was these, or it was, as it says here, the Lydians, the Babylonians, and the Egyptians. But it most likely represents these 3 powers. Now the Persians under Xerxes would later boast of enormous armies numbering 2 million people. During a period known as the Persian Wars, they waged brutal military conquests, committing atrocities especially against the Greeks. So Daniel repeatedly says that the empires seen in his vision look like creatures or wild beasts. The use of this metaphor is common in prophecy. So the third beast in verse 6. Adrian, would you read it again? Verse 6.
And this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it.
So another beast like a leopard. So before we go there, the Apostle John does the same thing as Daniel when he says, in one translation, something like a great burning mountain was thrown into the sea from Revelation 8, verse 8. In King James it says, as it were. So this idiom of being something like something else is quite often used in Daniel, and we see it also here in this prophecy of Daniel. So I saw another beast, like, or as it were, a leopard, 4 heads and 4 wings. What do you think the 4 heads and the 4 wings symbolize? Yeah, the 4 heads represent the fact that Alexander's death divided his kingdom among his 4 generals. Macedonia, Asia Minor, Syria, and Egypt were all given to his generals. Actually, if you look in history, you will find that there were 5, then there were 4, then there were 3 divisions. So it's an average of 4. It's not always exactly that way. There were 3 divisions. Cassander took Greece. Licinius took Thrace and Bithynia, which is modern-day Turkey. Seleucus took Syria, Babylonia, Persia. And Ptolemy took Egypt, with Palestine and Arabia. So we have these 3 generals, these 4 generals actually, and we should write them down so that you have them. These are important people and important divisions. So we have Cassander, C-A-S-S-A-N-D-E-R, and he took Greece and Macedonia. Then we have Lysimachus, L-Y-S-I-M-A-C-H-U-S, and he took Thrace and Bithynia, T-H-Y-N-I-A. Then we have Seleucus. These are Seleucus rulers, very famous in history. And they took Syria, Babylon, and Persia. And then we have Ptolemy, spelled with a T, but the T is silent. Ptolemy. And they took Egypt, Palestine, and Arabia. So I want you to remember those particular facts, very important for future reference. Nice to know these things. So these were the 4 wings. I believe the 4 wings represent the speed at which Alexander conquered the world. I'm sure you've heard about him, that he sat down and cried when there was no more to conquer. I don't know if that's true. But we do know that his men would go with him almost anywhere, but he got so far away from home they didn't want to go anymore. So he turned around and went back. And of course, we have the idea that he drank the Herculean cup of liquor or alcohol, and it was probably like something like 7 liters of alcohol at one time. It was very large, and that he died from that. Other people say he probably died from malaria. So different factors involved. So he was the general that was symbolized by the brass of Daniel chapter 2. So very fast, he was, how would you like to be a general at 18 or 19 years of age? Incredible, right? Maybe 20 years, 21. Very brilliant person. He conquered the world at 13 years. So we'll see more about him in Daniel chapter 11. Well, let's go on. Daniel chapter 7, verse 7. What do we see next? Adrian, would you help us again, please?
Verse 8.
7.
After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly. And it had great iron teeth. It devoured in breaking pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns.
So we have this beast now. The fourth beast is terrible. It leaves Daniel without adequate idioms to describe it. Of course, we have it here looking like some dinosaur or something. But note that it had iron teeth, like the iron of the vision of Nebuchadnezzar. So Rome's style was very different from that of prior empires. While all of them were brutal, the prior empires respected the cultures of the nations they conquered. But Rome generally did not. It crushed everything it took, trampled the history, culture, and people and religions into oblivion in an attempt to enforce the Roman might on those conquered nations. So Rome began with the occupation of Sicily about 471 BC. Of course, that's challenged. They believe that Rome was actually born some 700 something BC. But we see here that the Mediterranean became a Rome of around the Mediterranean Sea. Rome subjugated the areas of Italy and moved to Macedonia, Greece, Asia Minor, and also Turkey. Pompey was swept. The general Pompey came into Jerusalem in 63 BC after destroying what was left of the Seleucid Empire in Syria. And the empire eventually controlled Britain, France, Belgium, Switzerland, Germany, west of the Rhine. After peaking about AD 117, which was shortly after the time John the Apostle died, it declined. Rome left Britain about 407, and Rome was first sacked by the Visigoths in 410. And the third time Rome was sacked in 476 by Odoacer. So the fourth beast represents the cruel Roman Empire. It fell apart eventually. It was not conquered by an outside force so much, but because Rome lived in decadence, it fell from within. Actually, someone has said of the last 20 or so great nations that have come into existence, 19 of them fell from within more than from without, from immorality. So this power is going to be there The iron legs extend to the feet, and at the time of the feet, God's kingdom shall be set up. And of course, this is not done by Adventists, this presentation, so they don't have a complete understanding of all these things. But they do say that at the time it will be comprised of the 10 parts confederated under kings. Now that may not be exactly correct. 10 kingdoms perhaps. But remember, the numbers in the Bible have mean things. 10 means complete. It means ordinal perfection. So when it tells us that Moab was not to be included in the lineage of, or be included in Israel at all until 10 generations, the same verse says forever. So the word 10 means complete political perfection. So these 10 horns, I believe, mean complete subjection of the then known kingdoms of that time. So when we read again about the 10 horns or the 10 heads in Revelation, we need to understand sometime that this may not mean an actual 10, but a complete and thorough rulership. So let's not get caught up too much in the numbers, because the early Adventists did that, and they were arguing because they figured 11 tribes came into Rome, and there were only 10 toes. There weren't 11. And Sister White said that we shouldn't argue about these things in public. Now, here's a very interesting chart that is done by someone other than ourselves. Another, as I said, these are the people I got this from, are rapturous, actually. They believe in the rapture. But look how they compare everything, and they've got it pretty much correct. So they're taking what we have looked at, and of course the sources of MacArthur Bible Commentary, and under Daniel, the Times of the Gentiles. There's another view here. This is an Adventist view, which is very similar, but it also is lacking the last part, which is the second coming of Christ. But notice here, they're very correct. When they look here at Daniel chapter 2, we see there is no judgment hour message here in Daniel chapter 2, and we've mentioned why that is, and that's because the kings of the earth are not considering the fact that God is going to bring every work into judgment. So let's go now to Daniel chapter 7, verse 8. What do we see there? Adrian, I'm going to ask you again to read Daniel 7, verse 8, please.
It says, I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things.
Okay, so this boastful mouth is one of the primary descriptions applied to the coming world leader. He is described in several places as uprooting 3 of the 10 rulers of that empire. Note that this is another horn, not one of the 10. The reference of plucking up by the roots indicates a slow and deep political process rather than a military conquest. So, by the roots, which means something different than what happened to the tree that was represented by Nebuchadnezzar. It was cut down, right? And a band was put about it. So here we see these are uprooted by the roots. When you take a tree out by the roots, what do you usually do? You kill it. It's done away with. But there are trees where you can cut them down and they will still come back again if you haven't taken out the roots. So that's the reference here. For other reference of the 10 kings, we can see Daniel chapter 2, verse 31 through 35. What do we see in Daniel chapter 2 that has 10? The 10 toes, right? In Revelation, we also see Revelation 13, 1 and 2. Let's turn there again and look at that verse again. Revelation 13, verse 1 and 2. We're going to see something interesting in that particular place as well. And then we're going to compare Revelation 17 as well. Who will read Revelation 13, 1 and 2?
And I stood And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, and his seat, and great authority.
Power, seat, and great authority given to the beast by the dragon. Now notice the order in which the beasts of Revelation 13 are mentioned. What is the order? What's first? What beast? The leopard, right? The leopard, what's mentioned next?
The bear.
And what's mentioned next?
Lion.
Now what is the order compared to what we see in Daniel chapter 7? Is it the same?
It looks like it's reversed.
It's reversed. Why do you think it's reversed? I believe it's reversed because Daniel had it looking forward, and John is looking at it going backwards. So if he was looking at it going backwards from his time, how would he see these beasts? He would see the last first, would he not?
Yes.
He would see the leopard, and then the bear, and then the lion. Very interesting perspective. It's called the prophetic perspective. And you need to keep that in mind when you're reading the book. When you're looking at Ezekiel, for instance, and you see the 4 horsemen, and you see the 4 horsemen in Revelation. There are some relationships, but they're seeing it from a different point of view. They're seeing it from a different perspective, and therefore the order is different. So we see then that this reference here to Revelation 13 is a reference back to the book of Daniel. The connection is very clear. So from Daniel chapter 2, we see an overview of world's history. And that overview in the book of Revelation is seen in Revelation chapter 12. But the specifics of the Antichrist are seen in Revelation 13. So Daniel 7 points to Revelation 13. Daniel 8 would point to Revelation 14, which is what we will see. Now it's very important that we connect Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 in this way, and note very carefully that there is something missing in Daniel 2 which is emphasized in Daniel chapter 7. And what is emphasized in Daniel chapter 7? The vision of the heavenly part of the prophecy, which has to do with judgment. And after all, the book of Daniel is the book of judgment. So if we read in Revelation 17, 3 and 7, let's turn there and read that and compare that with Revelation 13 just briefly. What do we see that is different in Revelation 13 as a difference in Revelation 17? Who will read that? Note the difference, please. Go ahead, Richard.
Sorry, what chapter verse?
17 verses 3 and 7.
So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns.
All right, stop right there. Do you remember what we saw in Revelation 13? How many heads were there and how many horns were there?
I think there was 10.
7 heads and 10 horns, were there not?
Yeah.
What's the difference between 13 and 17? Look at it carefully. Note the difference. Discover it. What is the difference? Richard, you're the only one, or the few.
In verse 3 it says, full names of blasphemy.
Okay, but there's something else.
Okay.
What about the horns? What are on the horns in Revelation 13?
Crowns on the horns.
How many?
10 crowns.
And how many crowns are on the horns in Revelation 17?
So it's only 7, I think.
Because the horns were the black of the 3 horns.
Because there's 3 powers removed, so
Yeah? How many crowns do we see in Revelation 17?
I don't see the crowns mentioned.
Yeah, that's interesting. No crowns mentioned.
Yeah.
Do you think that has some significance?
Yes.
Well, according to what we know about monarchies. In World War I, most all the people in Europe were ruled by monarchies. What's the situation today? Do monarchies have any rulership? They're only in name only. There are no monarchies in ruling hardly in Europe. So maybe there's some significance to the fact there are no crowns ruling in these territories. So do we live in this period when the crowns are removed? Yes, we do. So that points to the time that we do live very close to the fulfillment of these prophecies. So notice those little kinds of differences that are significant. For instance, if you would look in Ezekiel chapter 1 and chapter 10 about the throne of God, there's a very significant difference about the four beasts. You might look that up and give me your take on it, because it's a very interesting but subtle difference. So what other references we have for the 10 kings? We have here in Daniel chapter 13 and chapter 17. Now, Daniel used the term uprooted to describe how the coming world leader will remove 3 kings or rulers from power to take over the nation. The same word is used again in chapter 12. The term uprooted, then we believe, represents gradual process, like the way we might gently pry a weed out of the ground to ensure that we get all the roots. It's not a rapid, sudden force or event. What does this write about the works of darkness? They're working subtly. What does that mean? Behind the scenes. So uprooting means underground. So they're working without being seen. This applies a political process rather than a military process, and fits a description of the so-called Antichrist as someone who appears peace-loving, having eyes before the world of a man, but will eventually show his true colors. Now, Daniel's attention is moved to a higher level now as we go into the rest of the chapter, from earth to heaven. Daniel 7 verse 9. What does it say there? Adrian, please. I looked and saw what?
I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire.
His wheels as burning fire. Again, we come to Ezekiel chapter 1 with a reference here. So he saw these wheels as burning fire. There are other places also that God the Father is described in similar terms. So we see the throne of God. Where do we see the throne of God in the book of Revelation? In chapters 4 and 5. Can you think of anyone else who saw the throne of God in such a way? How about Isaiah in chapter 6? We see Isaiah with a view of the throne of God. In the Old Testament, we know there are no beings in heaven that we see that are saved from among men. But in Revelation, we do see the 24 elders. And we only know of one resurrection where they could have come from, and that was when Jesus died. There was a resurrection, and many arose from the grave. And after he arose from the grave, they went into the city and testified before many. So we believe that in Ephesians chapter 4, when we read that he led captivity captive and gave gifts to men, what was he taking with him to heaven? He led captivity captive. What does that mean? He took those people who were resurrected with him to heaven. What do we read in Jude when Michael was arguing with Satan for the body of Moses? What happened there? There was an argument over the body of Moses, right? And what did the Lord say? He says, "The Lord rebuke you." I'm taking him anyway. So, and that's what the Apostle Paul actually refers to, I believe, in Romans chapter 5. Nevertheless, death reigned from Adam till Moses over them that had died. So that Moses incident where God actually resurrected Moses and took him to heaven is what Paul is talking about. So we see then that God had decreed in different places and revealed himself in glory in Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel. Also here in Daniel and the Revelation, we see the throne of God, views of the throne of God, and we see the blazing wheels as described in Ezekiel. And it's hard to really understand these appearances. Wheels within wheels. And it almost sounds like a great flying machine. And as I read it, I almost think of an airplane which draws up its wheels. It almost gives that description that the wheels are retracted and then they come down for a landing. But one thing about this throne of God, it does not turn. Did you notice that when if you look at the book of Ezekiel? It goes straight forward. It moves. There's no turning of the throne of God. So it doesn't work like an airplane, to turn, or a car or whatever. Whatever direction it moves in that direction without turning at all. So there's a great gyroscope in the throne of God which doesn't allow it to turn, to move in any direction. It goes straight forward. It has 4 faces, and whatever face it moves, the direction it moves straight in that direction. So it tells us here in chapter 7, verse 9, what did he see in this vision where Daniel talked about the, verse 8 is what I'm looking for. It says, the thrones, thrones were plucked up. Now he goes in chapter 9, he says, I looked and thrones were set, and Ancient of Days sat down, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was pure wool. His throne was like a fiery flame, and the wheels like burning fire. And then verse 10, a fiery stream flowed from before him. Millions ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court of judgment was set, and the books were open. So what do we see here? What kind of scene do we have? Let's mention for a minute the reference to the book. The books were open. What books are they? Have you had any, in your other lessons, have you had any talk about the books? Okay, let's mention the books and the reference to them. This is something you should also know about. The books. What are those books? The books were open. All right. Let's look at Isaiah. We'll look first at Isaiah 65, verse 6. We'll look at Malachi chapter 3, verse 16. Would each of you kindly look up some of these verses, please? We're going to look at Exodus 32, verses 32 and 33. We have Psalms 69, verse 28, and Isaiah 4, verse 3. We have also Revelation 3, verse 5, Revelation 13, verse 8, and Revelation 22, verse 19. So why don't we start with the one you've mentioned? This is the book of life. In Revelation 13:8 and 22:19. Who will read that? Please. Quickly.
22:19.
Yeah.
And if any man shall take away from the words of the book of this prophecy, God shall take away his part out of the book of life and out of the holy city, and for the things which are written in this book.
Okay, so Revelation 3:5 says, blessed are the faithful, whose names are written, I will not blot his name out of the book of life. So this is the book of life. We have the book of the living here. This is called the book of the living.
Is there the book of remembrance somewhere too?
Yes, book of remembrance. Okay, that is in Malachi, remembrance. That's in Malachi. We don't have time to read them all, but Isaiah is actually evil deeds, evil. Book of the dead, call it, in it, but that's not really what we call it. And then we have here the book of truth, which is what what Moses said. He wanted his name blotted out of the book of truth if God didn't save the people. So we see here that Daniel also mentions the books were opened. So we have different books mentioned in Scripture. In verses 11 through 12, he says, I continued to watch because the voice of the boastful words which the horn spoke. As he looked, the beast was slain and his body destroyed and thrown into the burning flame. The rest of the beasts had their authority taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. So the other beasts representing the former kingdoms continue to survive in some form. Note that virtually all the nations making up the ancient empires have been revived in recent decades. So Greece was abolished or conquered by Rome in 146 BC, but has emerged again as a nation, though not an empire. That was in 1830. Lysimachus' kingdom was taken by Rome in 133 BC, yet Media re-emerged as Turkey in 1924. The Seleucid kingdom of Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Cyprus, Babylon or Iraq, Persia or Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan were absorbed by Rome in 64 BC, but these nations have emerged again. Afghanistan in 1921, Iran in 1925, Lebanon in 1930, Jordan in 1946, Pakistan in 1947, and Israel in 1948. Ptolemy's Egypt was taken by Rome in 31 BC, and yet it reemerged as a nation in 1922. So Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon reemerged as Saddam Hussein's Iraq, and even the same symbolized or believed he was the lion with eagle's wings. That's how he symbolized his kingdom. He wanted to rebuild Babylon. Now, we see in Revelation, in Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 and 14, as he says, I saw in the night vision, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days and brought him near before him. And there was given him an authority to rule and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, languages, and tongues should serve him. His dominion and everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. So this is the vision, basically, to 14. And here it tells us at the end of this vision that Daniel was going to take the kingdom and that God's people were going to take the kingdom. In verse 26, it says, and judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion to consume, to destroy it unto the end. That's chapter 7. I wanted the verse, I think, 27. Let's see, the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, in the middle of 27. One translation of that shall be given in favor of the people of the Most High. That means that God's kingdom, God's people, were going to be accounted righteous. So we see now that this time of the prophecies of Daniel, we've gone through only the first part, and then the second part, we haven't gone into the interpretation. So we've taken the time to study this chapter a little more thoroughly, and we'll have to take up the rest of it in our next session. There we will get into the issues of the Antichrist. So you'll have an assignment now to create a presentation on Daniel, one of the chapters of Daniel. You can choose which one you want. You need to do a PowerPoint presentation on one of the prophecies of Daniel. So if you want to work together in teams to do that, that would be fine. I don't have a problem with that you can work together to try to come up with a very nice presentation that you could use as a Bible study to summarize, without going all these details. Okay, you're not going to go into all these details when you give a Bible study. But if a person has interest in different things, you want to have a wealth of knowledge to be able to present to people, because we're not going to go into the greater details in every Bible study. Some people you might, might give a lot of this information. But the important thing that we're looking at here in the book of Daniel is the nature of the judgment. Right here, you see the judgment? What is emphasized in Daniel chapter 7? The judgment. What is the book of Daniel about? God is my judge. So we must very strongly connect Daniel 2, Daniel 7, and Daniel 8 and 9. So that's what I'm emphasizing in our studies of Daniel. That you need to see the line, the progressive amplification, which we studied in our hermeneutic classes, on how these things are connected together. So next time, we will begin our study with a short review, and then Daniel chapter 7, verses 15, we'll read to the end of the chapter and go to the interpretation and see what happened with Daniel when he got to the end of it. He says, "My cogitations much troubled me, and my countenance changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart." So there were some things in Daniel himself that he needed to do to try to understand the vision. But now, as we close our meeting for today, I thank you for your attention and your patience, and I hope that this information was of value to you as you consider what you're going to do as you present the Daniel 7 in its context and lead to the prophecies of Revelation, particularly Revelation 12 and 13, and eventually Revelation 14. Okay, any questions now before we close? Actually...